Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy little human being you. Welcome to today's Morbid makeup story. I am so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that we were able to find each other on this adorable little earthly rotation. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing Richard Ramirez, a serial killer dubbed the Night Stalker who went on a murdering rampage like a rabid dog where he killed nearly 20 people but attacked, traumatized, and raped many more over a 14-month period. He did a lot of damage in a very short amount of time, and we are starting this new year off with a big one. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new Morbid makeup story every week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you. Join us. One of us. One of us. One of us. Now that we're done with all that shameless self-promotion, happy 2021, guys. Is it done? Is it over yet? No, of course not. But I think good things are going to come, right? Good things are going to happen, but for now we're going to talk about some bad things. Actually, though, speaking of good things coming, I am so excited to say that this video, my first video of 2021, is actually a collab video with another true crime YouTube channel that I think all of the Brat Pack would enjoy. I am partnering up with a channel called Mystery Avalanche, which if you are not familiar, it's a channel that's run by a couple named Annie and Drew, and they do some cool stuff over there. They do true crime stories, mystery stories, dark history, all the creepy stuff that if you've been here a while, you know I love, so I thought it was a perfect fit for us here. So on both of our channels, we're going to be covering Richard Ramirez today. Annie is going to give you an overview of the case, all of the condensed details, quick and to the point, like 15, 20-minute long video, where I am going to go into like the deep, ridiculous overview. I fell into a Richard Ramirez size hole here, guys, so it's going to be a long one. I already know that. So with that said, when you're done here, go on over to the Mystery Avalanche channel. I'll have it linked down below. Watch their video, give them a subscribe, tell them I said hi and that I sent you. I think you will like it. And now, gather around and let me tell you the story of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. So Richard Ramirez, guys, there is just so much to be said about Richard Ramirez. He was he's the poster child for nature versus nurture, because it's hard to believe, once we get into the story, you'll understand, it's hard to believe that a person could be that evil despite anything that happened to them. But as you'll learn about, little Richie here, he had a lot of things that happened in his childhood that could try to connect some of these dots. So I'm going to be telling you a lot about his childhood and things that happened in his developmental years, but just to be clear, it is not to excuse his behavior, simply to explain, because he is an absolute monster. But he was a monster with an abusive father, a lack of supervision, a crazy, intense, murdering cousin who introduced him to some really dark stuff way too early, an uncle who was a peeping Tom, and a couple of pretty serious head injuries. But let's get into the nitty-gritty and start from the beginning. Richard Ramirez, born Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez, was born February 29th, 1960, making him a Pisces. Richard was born in El Paso, Texas, and he was the youngest of 5 children born to parents Julian and Mercedes, and he grew up in a strictly Catholic religious household. The family was so religious, in fact, that Richard was actually an altar boy when he was younger. Richard's father, Julian, was a police officer in Mexico, but he ended up leaving that job and moving his family across the border into El Paso, Texas, where he became a manual laborer on the railroad. And Richard's mother worked as well. She worked in a boot factory. The family didn't have a lot of money. Both parents did have to work super hard in order to raise 5 kids, because kids are really expensive, so they weren't home a lot. Now, whether it be the stress of raising a family or just life in general, or maybe it was just his nature overall, but Julian, Richard's father, was a pretty aggressive and pretty abusive man. He not only beat his wife Mercedes, but his kids as well. He was just not a very nice guy. And Richard had said later in life that his home life was so bad that he would do anything he could to avoid his dad and his dad's temper. So he took to leaving when he was a teenager. He would leave the house at night and go sleep in a local cemetery. Now, in addition to Richard's poor home life, which is already something that we hear about in a lot of the backstories of serial killers, Richard also had 2 pretty serious head injuries, both during his developmental stages in life. The first of these head injuries happened when Richard was just 2 years old. He was trying to climb up a dresser when it came and fell down on top of him, crashing into his head, requiring him to have a bunch of stitches. And the other one was when he was only 5 years old. He was at the playground when a swing swung and smacked him in the head so hard that it knocked him unconscious. And after this head injury at 5 years old, Richard started having epileptic seizures that lasted until he was a teenager and then suddenly stopped. So as Richard got older, he was still trying to avoid his father, and he started spending a lot of time with his older, cooler cousin, Miguel, who went by Mike. And normally, you know, hanging out with an older cousin isn't an issue, but I think, and a lot of people believe that Mike, well, I mean, it's pretty obvious that Mike was a pretty bad person for Richard to be hanging out with at such a, I'm going to say developmental, like a ton of times, but such a developmental age in his life. Mike had problems, dude. So he was a Vietnam War veteran, and as we know, a lot of guys who came back from that war came back pretty messed up. Just a lot of mental issues from what happened over there. So young Richard, he's only like 12 years old at this time. He's hanging out with this Army veteran with a lot of mental issues. And Miguel would tell him like really cool stories from the war about, you know, the battles he'd been in, the people he killed, the women he raped, things like that. In addition to telling Richard these real casual, cool war stories, he would also sit down with Richard and show him this really cool photo album. They'd sit and flip through this photo album, and it was filled with photos of women that Mike had raped, women that Mike had killed, women that Mike had beheaded, put their heads on sticks, stuff like that, to a 12-year-old. He would tell Richard about how awesome it felt and how powerful he felt to take the lives and torture these women, and Richard got a little excited from this. Ugh. As if this wasn't already bad enough, Mike would also give Richard these nifty little lessons on how to catch people and kill people, how to use a gun, and how to creep around quietly and not be seen. At 12. On May 4th, 1973, when Richard was just 13 years old, he was at Mike's house. They were just, you know, having one of their casual hangouts when Mike and his wife Jessica started to get in a big fight. So young Richard is just sitting on the couch watching this escalate, and it starts getting louder and starts getting more aggressive, when Mike straight up gets a gun and shoots Jessica in the face, right in front of 13-year-old Richard Ramirez. Just straight murdered her. And Richard said that when this happened, he could smell the blood and he felt connected to the dead. So Mike, of course, got arrested for this because, I mean, he just straight murdered somebody in front of a kid. But he ended up pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, and he did not go to prison. He only ended up spending 4 years in a mental institution. So right from the bat, we have this kid who's subjected to 1, a really bad role model. 2, murder and sex being fused together by the stories and the photos his stupid cousin showed him. 3, a freaking murder right in front of his face. And 4, a lack of punishment and accountability bestowed upon Miguel for committing murder. So that's not good. And once Miguel got out of jail, him and Richard stayed friends, and they were friends all through Richard's murder spree later, which we're going to get to. So shortly after this, when Richard is still 13 years old, he can't hang out with Miguel anymore. Miguel's in jail. So he's like, okay, I'm going to go and stay with my sister and her husband, you know, get away from my father, put some distance there. So he goes and starts staying with his sister and his sister's husband, right? The problem is that apparently Richard Ramirez just had a lot of shitbags in his life, right? Because his sister's husband, whose name was Roberto, well, Roberto was a peeping Tom. So Richard and his cousin Roberto would do some really cool family bonding. You know, they'd hang out and they'd walk around the neighborhood and they'd look in the windows at all of the women in the neighborhood. In addition to being an absolute creep, Roberto also had a pesky little drug problem, and he introduced drugs to young Richard. And Richard ended up having a really bad issue later with both hallucinogens and cocaine. Cocaine. And I mean, I could tell that just by looking at him. If you see his teeth, like that, those are drug teeth. His teeth were just wrecked. But that's also because Homeboy didn't brush his teeth at all and only lived off of junk food. Fun fact for you: sugar, candy, soda, and he never brushed his teeth. So his teeth were just like really, really, really gross. And his teeth actually ended up being something that his victims later that he let survive described in great detail. And his teeth ended up helping him get convicted later. So after getting, into all these drugs and having, Mike and Roberto as his influences when he was younger, Richard started deciding that, like, Catholicism just wasn't really his thing. He wasn't really into religion, and he started getting darker, creepier, and decided that he was a Satanist, which fine, okay. That's very high school, honestly, to get very into like metal and black clothes and Satan. That's a thing that a lot of kids go through, but most kids don't end up like Richard Ramirez. When Richard was 16 years old, he got a part-time job at a hotel. It was a Holiday Inn, and this is where, at 16, he first committed a crime that fused sex and violence together. A woman and her husband had been staying in this hotel, and Richard had stolen a key card that could, give you access to the room. And the husband had left the room at some point, and as soon as he did, Richard used that key card and let himself in. The wife had just gotten out of the shower, and Richard immediately attacked her and tried to rape her right there during his job. Like, I don't know what his plan was. I guess to just rape. I don't know. This woman's husband came back in the middle of it, found freaking 16-year-old Richard Ramirez trying to rape his wife, and beat the ever-living crap out of this kid, which, good. My husband would do the same. That kid, he probably would have died if it was my husband, gotta be honest, but beats the crap out of him. So the cops are called, and Richard obviously gets fired, and they're going to press charges against him, but here's the issue. This couple lived out of state, and they didn't want to come back for like the trial and to do all of the work that goes along with pressing charges against somebody. So Richard got off on this. Didn't get in any trouble, didn't have to serve any time, just lost his job. So again, Richard saw that there's no lasting consequences to attacking and hurting people, just like with Mike Gell. And these are just examples to show that Richard Ramirez grew up as a pretty maladjusted teenager, because he had started to fuse sex and violence in his head because he had been exposed to so much sex and violence from like the influential people in his life, obviously. And by this time, since there was a lack of supervision and nobody's really paying attention to him and he's bouncing around from place to place, he dropped out of school and he had become a really good burglar. He had had his practice from, burgling homes and stealing things from stores. And by 16, he was really good at it. And he was also really good at stealing cars. And this is probably due to all that stealth training that Mike gave him, When Richard Ramirez was 22 years old, he decided that Texas wasn't for him anymore, and he decided he was going to move on to the sunny state of California, starting in good old San Francisco. But I don't think Richard Ramirez wore flowers in his hair. He didn't really seem like a flowers in his hair type of guy. When Richard arrives in San Francisco, he starts staying in a hotel, and this is something you'll see that he does quite often. I don't think he ever even had a permanent residence in California. He just bounced around from hotel to hotel. And it was while staying in this hotel in San Francisco that Richard Ramirez committed his first ever murder, or his first known murder. Now, if you've made it this far, I'm sure you know that this is a pretty gnarly case, right? If you clicked a video about Richard Ramirez, I would hope that you would know what's coming. But in case you don't and you need a trigger warning, here it is. Warning, warning, warning. Richard Ramirez was a monster, and the things that he did and the things I'm about to describe are some of the worst that I've ever read about, okay? So there's your warning. In early April of 1984, while Richard is staying in the hotel in San Francisco, he murdered his first victim, a 9-year-old girl named May. She was 9 years old, dude. I don't know if he kidnapped her or if he led her to the basement, but he took her to the basement of the hotel where he raped her, stabbed her, and strangled her. He then hung her body from a pipe in the ceiling by her own shirt, displaying her body like Christ on the cross. But this case was not connected to Richard Ramirez until 2009, 25 years after her murder, which is just so frustrating. Can you imagine her parents for 25 years not knowing who did that to her? It's so annoying. And Richard, I don't believe, ever confessed to this. I believe it was DNA that tied him to the case so many years later. During Richard's crime spree, he did this thing where he would kind of bounce back and forth from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Most of his crimes were committed in the Los Angeles area, and while he was there, he stayed on Skid Row in the Cecil Hotel, which, if you're not familiar with what Skid Row is, it's an area in Los Angeles. It's just got a very large homeless population. You'll see a lot of tents and a lot of people living on the street there. So he'd stay there and then he would steal a car, he'd get on the LA Basin freeways and he would drive up and down until he took an exit and ended up in a suburban area where he would just choose a house that looked like one he would like, something that had low windows and screens that he could remove, something easy to break into. Richard did not stalk his victims beforehand or case the houses. He would just drive around until he saw something he liked and then break in. It was all totally random. Richard's next known murder happened in June of 1984, and it was in the Los Angeles area. Richard broke into the home of a 79-year-old woman named Jenny by going through an open window and cutting out the screen and then just slinking inside. When Jenny was found the next morning by her son, she had been stabbed to death, she had been raped, and her throat had been cut so deeply that she was almost decapitated. Her son, who lived in the apartment above her, had the unpleasant experience of finding his mother this way, a 79-year-old woman. Nearly a year later, on February 25th, 1985, Richard Ramirez committed his next known attack. He kidnapped a 6-year-old girl from a bus stop while she was sitting there waiting to be picked up. He abducted her off the street, shoved her inside a garment bag, which he zipped up and took off with her. He then sexually assaulted her and then dropped her off on the side of the road, but left her alive. I personally believe that there were more victims between June 1984 and February of 1985, just because, and you'll find when I tell you about all his other crimes, Richard was not one to put a lot of space in between his crimes. He was pretty insatiable. I mean, even the murders that we already talked about, May and Jenny, there was only a month in between those two, so I have a hard time believing that he waited a year before doing anything else. I just think there are things that aren't connected to him. That's my opinion. But anyways, a few weeks after the assault of the girl from the bus stop, Richard Ramirez abducted a 9-year-old boy in March of 1985, sexually assaulted this boy, and left him too on the side of the road alive. Nearly a year after his first murder, in March of 1985, Richard Ramirez attacked a 22-year-old woman named Maria. Maria had just gotten off work and she had pulled her car into her garage, and as, she was pulling in, he slinked in her garage without her seeing him. And as she got out of the car, he immediately shot her in the face, point blank range. But oh my God, this girl was so smart and so lucky. She had put her hands up like this to block her face, and when he shot her, her keys were in her hand. The bullet ricocheted off her keys, missing her face. I think it hit her fingers. And she was smart enough and had the idea on the spot to just fall straight to the ground and play dead. So she did that, and Richard just walked right past her and went into her house. So she was lucky and she survived, but the same could not be said for her roommate, a girl named Dale. Inside, 34-year-old Dale had heard the gunshot and was hiding. She was like, oh shit. And she was ducking behind the counter, I believe, in the kitchen. And Richard Ramirez came in the house and was slinking around, and it's so sad. She poked her head out to see where he was, and at that moment he saw her and he shot her straight in the face, killing her, obviously. He then robbed their house and left, but this night he was insatiable and he came upon a woman, a 30-year-old woman named Sai Lian Yu, who I've also seen put as Veronica. I don't know if that was a nickname. She was sitting in her car and he walked up to the car, he ripped open the door, he called her a bitch, he pulled her out of the car, shot her a couple times, and then ran off into the night. She did not survive this attack. And this calling women a bitch thing was kind of Richard's thing, which, I mean, I know a lot of people call women bitches, but he did it so much that later the victims that he let live all told police this. So when he was eventually caught, spoiler alert if you didn't know, and there was a lineup with, him in it, they made each person say shut up bitch so that the victims could identify him by him saying that. That's how often he said it. So just a little fun fact for you there. A few days after the murders of both Dale and Sai Lian, Richard Ramirez abducted an 8-year-old girl in Eagle Rock, California, raped her a couple times, and then left her on the side of the road. That same month, on March 27th, 1985, at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, Richard broke into another home in Whittier, California. He then entered this home that belonged to 64-year-old Vincent and his 44-year-old wife, Maxine. He immediately shot Vincent in the head while he slept on the couch, which is just so sad. And he went in the room and he bound Maxine and started ransacking the house, okay? And, oh my God, while he's doing this, Maxine has found a way to get her hands free. I'm sorry, this is like an actual nightmare to me. Just waking up in the night to my husband being killed is already an absolute nightmare to me. That's one of my biggest fears, but it gets even worse than that. So she hears it happen. She's bound. She's sitting there. He's ransacking. She gets her hands free and she thinks, oh, we have a shotgun under the bed. So she grabs the shotgun. She cocks it. She points it at Richard. She pulls the trigger and just hears an empty click. There were no bullets in the shotgun. Can you imagine? I can't, it makes me so sad to think about what she must have felt in that moment, because you have to know at that moment, that's it. Like, you're going to die. And apparently they normally kept it loaded, but they had just had their grandkids at their house and they took the bullets out because they wanted to be safe for their grandkids. So as I'm sure you can imagine, Richard was super, super pissed and he shot her 3 times, but he was not done. He did so much. It's a lot. I'm going to tell you now, it's a lot. Okay. He went in the kitchen and he got a knife. He then cut out Maxine's eyes and he put them in her jewelry box, which when he left, he took the eyes with him. What? Right? And he wasn't done. He decided he wanted to mutilate her body. He was super pissed. He cut like a super aggressive, like T-shaped cut into her breast. He cut up her face, her body, her like pubic area, and then left. And when he left a footprint in the soil outside, which is something that happened a lot. He was not very good at not leaving his footprints at crime scenes because apparently he only owned like one freaking pair of shoes, and these shoe prints later helped connect all the murders to each other, because as you'll find, they were very different in a lot of ways that normally you wouldn't connect them, but because of the shoe prints you were able to. And they also found bullets at this scene that matched bullets at other crime scenes later. And from here, dude, Richard just went ass bananas, because you hear about serial killers and you hear about their crimes and how they killed so many people, but in my head, it's always spread over like a longer period of time, but not Richard, dude. He was insatiable and he did it all so fast. I'm not certain if he killed every time he needed money because he always robbed them, or if he just really liked killing. He was never clear on that point, but Jesus. Shortly after Vincent and Maxine, Richard entered the home of 66-year-old Harold and his wife, 66-year-old Jean. He then immediately shot Harold, and then he bound Jean with these. He brought thumb cuffs, which I had never even heard of until his case, but I'll show you a photo. He brought thumb cuffs and he bound her with those and then started to beat her with his fists. He then threw her on her husband's dying body, and I believe he raped her on her husband's dying body. He then left and left her alive. Next was 44-year-old Ruth Wilson and her 12-year-old son. He broke into their house in the middle of the night. He used her 12-year-old son as leverage to get her to lead him around the house and give him all of her valuable things that he could have to steal and sell. He then bound the boy, locked him in a closet, and then raped Ruth. And then before he left, he tied Ruth and her son together and then let them both live. In May of 1995, Richard Ramirez went over to Monterey Park, California, where he entered a home through an open window. Inside lived 66-year-old Bill and his 56-year-old wife, Lillian. So Richard enters the room and him and Bill start to fight. Like, they get in a physical altercation and Bill starts reaching for his own gun. And this is when Richard shot him in the face. This did not kill Bill right away, however, and so Richard started to beat him with his fists until he thought the job was done. He then started going around the house, stealing what he could, and this is when he found Lillian, who was physically disabled to the point that she had to stay in a bed. Okay? Richard then binds her, this woman who can't even move, and rapes her. Yeah. And while this is happening, apparently Bill was still alive and he was able, like, he wasn't in any place to help, but he was able to crawl to a phone and he called the police, and Richard heard this happening and left. Lillian lived, but her husband, who was her main caretaker, Bill, did not. So later that same month, in May of 1985, Richard Ramirez steals a car, which, by the way, this is something he did all the time. He always stole a new car whenever he did a new crime, and this made it so that it was really difficult to track him in the beginning, but it did end up helping get him caught later, which we'll get there. We're getting there. Later. He did a lot, guys. Anyways, he drove this car to the home of 83-year-old Ma Bell, and her 81-year-old sister, Florence, who went by Nettie. This one makes me super mad every single time. Every murder is bad, but something about this one just gets under my skin. So he enters the home of these old women, and while he's lurking through the shadows, he comes upon a hammer, which he's like, cool, I'll take this, I can use this. And he slinks through the house. He then beat both of these women who are in their 80s, with a hammer. He beat them so bad that there was exposed brain matter, okay? But then he realizes, oh, they're still alive. What can I do now? So he grabs, I believe it was either a lamp or a alarm clock off the night table, rips it out of the wall, makes it so that the wires are exposed, and proceeds to shock these women to torture them while they're still alive. He then proceeded to rape them, and then he found one of their lipsticks and drew a pentagram on Ma Belle's inner thigh. 83-year-old Ma Belle drew a pentagram on her inner thigh, then just kind of hung out in their house, ate some food, used their restroom, and then left. Their bodies were found 2 days later by a handyman, and they were both somehow still alive, but they did not live. They were just still technically alive. That same month, May 30th, 1985, 41-year-old Carol is sleeping in her bed when Richard Ramirez enters her home, rapes and sodomizes her, but leaves her alive. She went on later to describe him as good looking, which is really weird to me. But you know, I'm not in that situation. That might not be how I would describe my rapist, but I'm not like judging her. It just seems a little odd. But that was the thing about Richard Ramirez, is he actually like objectively sort of was physically attractive, I guess, but we have to remember here that he was a dumpster fire of a person, a dumpster fire with high cheekbones. In June of 1985, Richard stole a car and then drove to the home of 29-year-old Edward and his girlfriend, Nancy. He broke into the house, he murdered Edward, he raped Nancy, and then left her alive. Okay, so, and this part's going to be ridiculous to you. So it's still the same month, June of 1985, and Richard tries to enter a home, but he realizes like the person's in there and awake, so he leaves. And he's super frustrated because he was really excited to freaking kill people, right? So he leaves all frustrated, and he sees this little girl, and he tried to kidnap her, but she like freaked out, and so he left. And again, he's super frustrated, and due to his frustration, he completely runs a red light and gets pulled over by a cop. And at this time, Richard is in a stolen car. So the cop pulls him over, and the cop's like, hey, wait a minute. This guy kind of looks like the description of the guy who just tried to kidnap that girl, and also this looks like the car of the guy who tried to kidnap that girl, right? So he jokingly says to Richard, hey, you're not that guy like breaking into people's homes and killing them, are you? And I'm sure Richard, I'm sure his stomach was about to fall out of his butt, but he keeps it super cool, and he's like, no way, man. When are you guys gonna catch that mother? Like, what? And I'm sure the two just laughed about, you know, their little mutual joke they were saying, and then the cop goes back to his car to run the plates. Okay, and I'm sure Richard's like, okay, these plates are gonna come back hella stolen. So he gets out of the car. He draws a pentagram either on the hood or the windshield, and then runs off into the night like some Harry Houdini bullshit. Is that not the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard in your entire life? Anyways, shortly thereafter, the same month, June of 1985, Richard enters the home of a woman named Patty, who is 32 years old, and he slit her throat ear to ear while she slept in her bed. In July of 1985, Richard stole a car and drove to the home of 75-year-old Mary, a woman who had survived cancer twice. Richard then beat her with a lamp and then stabbed her to death in her throat. July 5th, 1985, 16-year-old Whitney is sleeping in her bed in her parents' home with her parents in the room right next door. Richard enters her room and hits her in the head with a tire iron multiple times. And then while she's laying there bleeding and confused with her parents just right next door, he raped her and then left in the night, and her parents found her the next morning having no idea what had happened to their daughter. She survived this. Again, in July of 1985, Richard entered the home of 61-year-old Joyce. And he started to beat her while she slept on her couch. Okay, and this one's really intense. He starts to beat her on the couch. He then stomps her to death. He stomped her so hard that it killed her, and he stomped her face so hard that it left a shoe impression that they could later match to the other crime scenes. Who stomps a person to death? That same night, Richard wasn't done. He then entered the home of a 63-year-old woman named Linda. He put a gun to her head and then led her around the house looking for her valuables. He then took her in the room and bound her, and then tried to rape her. Tried to sodomize her, but couldn't keep an erection. And I guess he kept getting more and more mad, but like he couldn't keep it hard. So he ended up leaving and letting her live, which is just so lucky, because I'm imagining that would have pissed him off. And for some reason he did not kill her, probably because he couldn't combine the sex and the violence together. And I think he needed both. July 20th, 1985, same month, 32-year-old Cheetot was shot in the head while he slept in his bed. The sound of the shot woke his wife, and this is when Richard forced 29-year-old Sakima to perform fellatio on him. He then raped her, and the couple had a son, and this part is really messed up. Like, if you have an issue when it comes to kids, I do. That's why you might notice I don't do a lot of kid cases, so I'm just letting you know that this part's really messed up if you want to skip ahead like 20 seconds or so. Maybe not 20 seconds, but you know what I mean. Richard then found the couple's 8-year-old son and sodomized this boy with a bottle of baby oil. What the actual dude, like, who does that? What kind of monster does that? And poor Sakima had to just like sit there and watch this happen and hear this happen and know that this happened to her son. He then kept asking Sakima where the money was, and she swore to God. She was like, I swear to God, I don't have any money. There is no money. And he was like, no, you don't swear to God. You swear to Satan. He then left and let Sakima and her son live. They lived, but her husband was dead and their lives were just completely ruined. As if that wasn't enough, Richard wasn't done this night either. You know, that whole murder, double rape wasn't enough for him because he was a piece of shit. He entered the home of 66-year-old Layla and her 68-year-old husband, Max. He murders them both with a machete, and then after they're dead, proceeds to shoot them both in the head. He robbed their home, and then just to, you know, stick it to them one more time, he mutilated their bodies before he left. I know that this has been a lot, like I'm aware, but we are not done. August 6th, 1985, Richard enters the home of 36-year-old Chris and 27-year-old Virginia. He shot Virginia in the face and Chris in the head, but somehow both of these people lived. Both of them lived, and they started to fight back with Richard, and he was like, oh shit, and he took off like a baby back bitch. When confronted with the struggle, he tucked his little baby back bitch tail between his little legs and took off running. Both of these people lived, which is just so wild to me because I feel like growing up, I always thought that if you were shot in the head, like that was it, you were done. But I've been finding more often, especially in this case, that it isn't always fatal, which I mean, I'm glad that they lived and I'm glad that he ran off, but like, what a little bitch, right? And these people, man, were just so strong. Like, that's crazy. That's wild. 2 days later, August 8th, 1985 at about 2:30 in the morning. Richard breaks into the home of 27-year-old Sakina, which is similar to the last victim, Sakima, and her 35-year-old husband named Elias. He entered the room and immediately shot Elias in the head and then punched Sakina in the face and threw her out of her bed. He then bound her and led her around the house to look for valuables, and when there was nothing else left to find, she was like, I swear to God, that's everything. And of course, like Richard always did, he was like, nah, you swear to Satan. During all this, she had 2 children who were in the house, and he kept threatening the kids if she didn't swear to Satan and if she didn't tell him where the valuables were. But eventually he did end up leaving, and he let all 3 of them live. In some of the reports I saw that he raped her. Some didn't say that he raped her, but knowing his track record, I think it's probably safe to say that he did. So while all of this is happening, the police have been just scrambling, trying to figure out what's going on. But they finally start connecting the dots and realize that they have one guy doing all this, a serial killer who is now dubbed the Night Stalker. So in August of 1985, Detective Frank Salerno, who was pretty instrumental in catching Richard and like connecting all the dots and finding out that there was in fact one killer, well, he decided he wanted to set up a press conference to sort of spook Richard. And he went on, TV and he said, hey guys, you might want to like hunker down, be safe, close your windows, get a gun, hide your kids, hide your wife, because someone's killing everybody out here. So gun sales started like going through the roof. Everybody was closing their windows and locking up tight, which is really intense for August in Los Angeles because it's so hot, but nobody was taking any chances. And Richard, he saw this press conference and he's like, oh shit, like the jig is up. It's getting kind of hot here in Los Angeles. I'm going to head back to San Francisco. While in San Francisco, he decided he didn't want to miss a beat and he decided that, he's going to kill some people while he's there as well. So that same month, August 1985, Richard breaks into the home of 63-year-old Peter and his 62-year-old wife, Barbara. He then killed Peter by shooting him in the head. He beat and raped Barbara before shooting her in the head as well. He then took a lipstick, drew a pentagram on their wall, and their poor son had to find them like this the next day. And Barbara, I believe, lived through this. So now that they know it's a serial killer, the crimes are getting more and more media attention, and they put out a story letting everybody know of the size and type of shoe that has been connected to all the crimes. So Richard's like, aw shit, again, and he decides, I gotta get rid of these shoes. So he realizes it's time to get rid of them, so he drives to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco and throws his shoes off the Golden Gate Bridge. So I guess he either had another pair of shoes that he just never wore or went out and bought new shoes, but he threw them over the Golden Gate Bridge. And then he headed back to LA. So again, August 1985, same month, real busy month for Richard. He decides he's gonna break into this house. So he's slinking around the yard when the 13-year-old son who's living in the house starts hearing noises. And at first he's like, it's a coyote or something, but then he realizes that it is a person. So he decides that he's going to go tell his dad. So he runs through the house and he tells his family and they start making noise in the house and Richard realizes they're like all up and gets spooked. So he goes to leave. And when he goes to leave, the son, who was a boy named James Romero, runs outside, gets the model and make of the car and a partial license plate number. This kid, little James Romero, freaking hero, dude. So he said that Richard like made a U-turn, and when he went to leave, he made eye contact with James Romero and then drove off, which, can you imagine? So freaking creepy. So Richard leaves, he ditches the stolen car, like always, and wives it down, like always. That same night, Richard entered the home of 30-year-old Bill and 29-year-old Inez. They were sleeping when he entered the home like usual, and he shot Bill 3 times in the head. He then asked Inez, do you know who I am? He then bound her, beat her, and made her proclaim her love to Satan as he sodomized her. When he was done, he kissed her softly and told her, tell them the Night Stalker was here. Somehow, Inez and Bill, who was shot in the head 3 times, survived this attack. And these were his last known nighttime prowling attacks. So after this, things start moving relatively quickly. Okay, the cops find the freaking abandoned car that he had been using that night. And when they see it, they're like, oh shit, that's that car that little James Romero boy saw, because they had the partial license plate number, right? So they start processing this car. They search it extensively. They fingerprint dust for fingerprints everywhere. And what do you know? Richard Ramirez left 1 fingerprint on the freaking rear view mirror when he adjusted it to be able to see. To think, Richard Ramirez was brought down by a vigilant teenager. I'm sure he just hates that too, because he seemed to me, he seemed like the type of guy that he wanted to have that amazing, like, intense story. I think a lot this is like my opinion, obviously, but my opinion from him and listening to his interviews and stuff is that he wanted to be like the worst of the worst, have the most intense story, and just be as evil as possible. And to have all of that ended because of a teenager, because you were dumb and left a thumbprint. I love it. I love it. So they run the print and boom, Richard Ramirez. He was in the system from all the other stupid crimes he had done when he was younger, and they now had a face from his mugshot and a name for the man who had been terrorizing the community for all those months. The man who had no specific pattern, the man who was uncatchable, the man who had been just terrorizing, inflicting so much pain on the community at large. So the police call a press conference and they address Richard directly and they're like, hey bro, we know your name. We know your face and soon everyone else will too, and there is nowhere you can hide. And then they distributed his mugshot everywhere. While all of this is happening on August 30th, Richard just happens to be leaving California to go visit his brother in Arizona. He wasn't running, it was just like the most happy coincidence ever. So Richard buses all the way to Arizona, and for some reason when he gets there, he doesn't see his brother, and I'm not really clear on why that is, but either way, while he's busing there and then turning around and busing back, his face is being distributed all over Los Angeles through the newspaper and entering all the people's homes through the TV, and he has no idea that it's even happening because he's on a damn bus. So Richard gets back to Los Angeles on August 31st, 1985, and even though they had officers at the bus station in case he tried to run after seeing the news, the news coverage with his face, Richard gets off the freaking bus and walks right past the cops, and they don't even see him. Naturally. So he's walking, right, and he decides, okay, I'm gonna pop in this convenience store and grab something real quick. So he goes in, and what does he see? But a whole row of newspapers and magazines, all with his stupid face looking right back at him. Can you imagine what that felt like? I'm sure. It's just so funny. And then so there's a lady standing next to him who looks at him, looks at the paper, looks back at him and says, El Matador, which means the killer. And I'm sure he was just like, just ass bananas, right? So he takes off running on foot. He's trying to get as far away as possible. He tries to steal a couple cars along the way, and he finds himself in East LA. He sees a woman in East LA. He tries to steal her car, and she's like, you know what? Take it. Gives him the keys and runs away screaming. When she does this, men in the area hear her scream, so they start swarming Richard. One of the men even grabbed a metal pipe and beat Richard over the head. So Richard starts running for his life, leaves the car, trying to escape this mob of people. And while he's doing this, it's attracting more and more people, right? So he's running, and he even tries to like bang on a woman's door, and he's like, please help me. And she sees him and she's like, oh, no, you're him. So she doesn't let him in. So he keeps running, and eventually they catch up to him. And they start beating the shit out of him. This is like vigilante justice. They're like, you have been killing people and screwing with our whole community for a freaking year, and it's going down. So they're beating the crap out of him. And while all this is happening, while this mob of people has been chasing Richard down the street, somebody has, of course, called the cops, and the cops do show up, and they are able to save him before this mob kills him. And the cop even said, like, if we hadn't shown up, they would have killed him. And this part is just so sweet. As if all of that hasn't been so sweet. I love it. I love that he was caught this way. As he's handcuffed and pulled away from the angry mob, Richard looks to the cop and says, thank God you came. Really, Richie? Thank God? Not thank Satan? Also, thank God you came? That's what she said. So Richard was arrested, obviously, and I got a little fun fact for you. So while Richard was in jail waiting for his trial, Sean Penn, the actor, was in the same jail at the same time. Apparently, he had like disorderly driving and had like punched someone, like an extra, while he was filming a movie. He's got a little attitude, apparently. Well, they were in jail at the same time, and they had jail cells that were super close to each other. So they would see each other around, and eventually, apparently Richard was a fan, and he asked one of the guards to ask Sean Penn for his autograph. Okay. And Sean Penn at first was like, no, because I guess he had gotten into some sort of trouble, maybe for giving autographs while he was in the prison. So he asked for permission from like the warden or whoever. And once he got the permission, they had Richard write him a letter. Okay, so Richard wrote Sean Penn a letter, and it said, hey Penn, stay tough and hit him again. Richard Ramirez, 666. And then he drew like a pentagram and a tiny devil. To which Sean Penn responded, Richard, it's impossible to be incarcerated and not feel a certain kinship with your fellow inmates. Well, Richard, I've done the impossible. I feel absolutely no kinship with you, and I hope gas descends upon you before sanity does. It would be a kinder way out. I just thought that was super metal of Sean Penn to say, and a fun little fact for you to have since you're interested in this case. But anyways, the trial. After a few delays, the trial finally started in January of 1989, and it was the most expensive trial to date until the O.J. Simpson trial, which nudged it out. The prosecution had so much evidence. They found his handguns. They found jewelry and other items that had been stolen from some of the victims. The shoe prints at the crime scenes that matched his shoes. The fingerprint left at the crime scene that matched him. And of course, the victims that he left alive that could positively identify him. The defense tried to prove that this was just a case of mistaken identity. Richard had a total apple pie average face, and there was somebody else. But this was dumb because all of the surviving victims and the composite sketch showed that the killer had some nasty old rotten falling out teeth. And Richard's dental record showed that he had 9 missing teeth. And if you were just to look at him, like, his teeth are visibly just effed up. Another fun fact, by the way, is he did end up getting his teeth fixed while he was on death row in prison with taxpayer dollars. But again, that's a fun fact and I digress. Richard's father tried to give him an alibi for a couple of the murders by saying that he had actually been in Texas visiting family or something, but they were able to bring Richard's dentist to court to actually testify that he was in Los Angeles at that time and he was getting dental work done, because apparently he did go to the dentist sometimes, he just didn't brush his teeth because he was a nasty boy. If all of this wasn't bad enough, like, to kind of shoot a hole in that mistaken identity theory, Richard was not proving to be an easy person to defend, because in addition to just being like kind of a dick and laughing a lot and being inappropriate in court, he would also draw a pentagram on his hand and occasionally yell "Hail Satan" to anyone who would listen. He'd also give himself little devil horns. Like, he was not making it easy. His trial was just a big joke to him, man. He used it as an opportunity to just get more and more attention and to seem more and more messed up with the whole, pentagram and Hail Satan, devil horns. He'd like lean back and like wink and smile and wave at all the people who were present. And of those people who were present were Richard Ramirez groupies. Girls were so into Richard Ramirez because of the whole like metalhead thing and his physical appearance. But ladies, say it with me. He was a dumpster fire with high cheekbones and bad breath and rotten teeth. Another crazy thing that happened during Richard Ramirez's trial is that one of the jurors actually got murdered during his trial, and the other jurors thought that it was Richard Ramirez, that somehow he had orchestrated the murder from inside his cell to scare the jurors and to like kill them all off. But it turned out, sadly, that this woman was actually killed by her boyfriend and then he killed himself. But that's so sad, right? In November of 1989, Richard Ramirez was sentenced to death. He had been found guilty of 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. There were more things that Richard did do, but he never confessed to anything, and if there wasn't the evidence to connect him, there wasn't much that they could do, because as we know, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. Richard was sentenced to spend the rest of his years on death row at San Quentin State Prison until eventually his life would be taken in the gas chamber. The judge at Richard's trial had said that during his murder spree, he had demonstrated cruelty, callousness, and viciousness beyond any human understanding. Which, I agree. So after his verdict was read and he was found guilty, he was being led out to like the bus to go back to the prison, and the media was like hounding him. Like, how does it feel? How does it feel to be found guilty? How does it feel to be put on death row? To which Richard responded, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. I'll see ya in Disneyland." And then smirked. What? Anyways, while in prison, Richard Ramirez ended up marrying one of his groupies, a woman named Doreen. The couple had sent like 100 letters back and forth, and then Richard proposed to her. And on October 3rd, 1996, the two married in San Quentin State Prison. And I would love to know your opinion on this. Do you think that criminals who are on death row or have life in prison for really dangerous crimes like this should be allowed to get married? Should be allowed to have like conjugal visits? What is your opinion on that? Because I'm gonna say no. Maybe like on a case-by-case basis, depending on the circumstances, but in Richard Ramirez's case, he does not deserve romantic love. That's one of the most wonderful things in the entire world, and he doesn't deserve anything wonderful, especially that. Anyway, surprisingly, this marriage didn't last, and the two ended up getting a divorce in 2009 after Richard Ramirez was linked to the death of that 9-year-old girl, May, because apparently this one was too much for her. Not the others, just this one. So Richard Ramirez was in jail on death row until June 7th, 2012, when he died at 53 years old after spending 23 years on death row. Richard Ramirez died of liver failure due to complications that arose from him having blood cancer and also the years and years of his liver having to cycle through all of those drugs that he did. Apparently when he died, he had turned bright neon green due to his liver failure and was described as looking like a green highlighter. And that, my friends, is the story of the life, the crimes, and the death of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. I have so much to say, like a lot, so let's wrap. Richard Ramirez, man. Oh, there is so much to say about Richard Ramirez. To think that a person like this actually existed, that these crimes actually happened, is absolutely crazy. It's worse than a horror movie. It's horrifying. The thing about Richard is he was just so incredibly random, dude. He didn't have an MO. He didn't have an age range. He didn't have a victim type. He didn't stalk his victims beforehand. He didn't have any pattern. Every single person was a potential victim, from children to elderly people. It did not matter to him, which is so unusual. The only thing that was ever consistent is that he would enter your home in the dead of night and immediately take out the man to make it as easy as possible for him to inflict as much terror as he could without being, potentially overpowered by a man. And with everything that happened in his childhood, you could definitely go back and forth on the nature versus nurture thing, but man, okay, I know he was dealt, just a total shit hand, but so many people are dealt shit hands and don't go on to just have such viciousness in them and to do the things that he did. And he had no remorse at all, dude. I watched some interviews with him, and to hear him talk is just super eerie. I feel that way with all killers. Whenever I watch interviews with them, I'm just like, he just seems so, off. It's really hard to explain. You need to watch it to understand. He doesn't sound like a stupid man. He sounds like he's choosing his words very, carefully. But everything he said felt very shallow and rehearsed. It sounded to me like he wanted to sound more profound than he actually is. It's like he had a very specific way he wanted the world to see him and the way he wanted to portray himself. But the way I see it is he's just this weird kid that you knew in high school that wore a long black trench coat and told you how the government was programming your mind. It wasn't profound. It was just basic sounding to me. He said in interviews that he didn't care about himself, that he never did, and that he didn't particularly like people, which big surprise. He said that serial killers are a product of their times and that these are bloodthirsty times. He said he would not comment on whether or not he felt emotions and that he had given up on love and happiness a long time ago. He also said, and I quote, "We are all evil in some way, form, or another. I am evil. Not 100%, but I am evil." Which I might disagree. I might think you're 100% evil, Richard Ramirez. The interest in Richard Ramirez is high, right? He's one of the ones that people always talk about. He's one of the ones people write books about. For example, I bought myself this book a couple years ago as a birthday gift. I was like, #treat yourself. And I bought this book for myself. And just for reference, if you were going to pick it up, it's fine. It gives you a lot of details, but it's poorly written. I'm so sorry. Philip Carlo, I don't think writing was his day job. But he's always held people's interest, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that it's hard to wrap your head around the fact that even with a childhood as bad as his was, that there isn't something that's fundamentally wrong with him from the time that he was born to be that evil. And I think he likes being remembered as that evil, if I'm honest. I know he's dead now, but I feel like he wanted to be remembered as the evil, the worst person that ever lived. I think that was the vibe he wanted to give off. So I would implore you to instead remember him as a limp dick child molester. That sounds better to me, but that's just me. Now I did not know this, but I recently found that he did an interview, like a questionnaire for this really controversial magazine called Answer Me. I had never even heard of it. And his questionnaire was featured in the 1994 issue of this magazine that was just titled The Rape Issue. Suffice it to say, this was the last issue of this magazine that was ever printed, but just for funsies, I'm going to rattle off for you some of the little cheeky answers that Richard Ramirez gave to some of these questions, because I was like, of course he did. Favorite music? Heavy metal. Duh. Favorite actress? Samantha Strong, who I had to look up, but apparently she was a porn actress. Favorite vacation spot? Uranus. Classy, Richard. Favorite food? Women's feet. Of course. Pastimes and hobbies? Traveling and measuring coffins. Of course. Biggest like? Cocaine. That's clear. Describe yourself. An asshole. And proud of it. We know. If you like a girl, how do you get her to notice you? I pull out my gun. Cute. Motto. Live each day like it's your last. Asshole. And what's your message to your fans? Keep your spirit strong. The fact that this asshole had fans is so irritating to me. This guy was a murderer and a child rapist. Come on, okay? Jesus. I'm so over him. I need like a long, relaxing break after spending so much time just looking into this freaking loser's life. But don't worry, I'm not going to take the break. Like, there's still going to be a video coming up next Monday. I'm just saying, like, metaphorically, I need a break. And I say I'm over him, but there is a Netflix special coming out on him on January 13th, so just about over a week from the time that I'm uploading this. And even though I say I'm over him, you know I'm going to watch it, because I don't know, man, I'm weird, I don't know. But I mean, so are you, that's why you're here, right? But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, that it was informative, and most importantly, I hope it made sense, because with this case, I have never in my life looked into a case that had so much conflicting evidence about like very basic things. People's names, who lived and died. There is so much misinformation out there. So I did my absolute best to put together what I saw the most and what I believe is true. But just know, my God, this was like one of the harder ones to look into, because it's like, how do you get people's names so wrong and whether or not they lived or died? It's very confusing, but I did my best, and that's why I say I really hope it was easy to follow. And of course, I also hope you enjoyed watching it, because that's very important to me, is that you enjoy what I'm putting out into the world. Please, of course, let me know down below of any cases you'd like to see me cover. I have an ongoing list, but every time you add a suggestion, I add it to my list to look into, because I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste, or you would not be here. Please, of course, join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell, because I put out a new Morbid makeup video every single week. And if you're not already following me on Instagram and Twitter, just know that I am actually super active on there. I know I don't say it in all of my videos. I'll try to get better about that, but I'm always like on Instagram stories putting up polls and popping off on Twitter about just whatever nonsense comes into my head. So if that's something you want to do, make sure to follow. And don't forget to go down below and click the link and go see Annie's video on the Mystery Avalanche YouTube channel and tell her and Drew that I said hi. And with all of that said, thank you so much for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. This is tight. You are tight. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.